Wave, and this video is actually going to be me talking about Omega Quintet and how I believe Omega Quintet is a very underrated game. I played through it a while back, and even now I still think the game is very good in quality. I would compare it to I would almost compare it to games such as like Earthbound and maybe even like Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Explorers of Sky, and that these are games that came out to very like lukewarm reception. Maybe the marketing wasn't all that great, and came out, years passed by, people were like, okay, you know, it's not actually all that great. And then as time passed by even further, you start to really realize that, you know, maybe looking into the story, maybe looking into the gameplay, that this game is actually something really special. It's not something that it's a game for everyone, but it's also just like a game that's very different, and I don't know, I just figured I would make this video to really describe my thoughts on this game. So hopefully, as I get into this video, you guys will watch it, see my opinion on it, and hopefully you'll enjoy. So, let's get right into it. Alright, hello everyone, I'm Wave, and today I'm gonna be doing a very different video. Today I'm going to be talking about a game by the name of Omega Quintet, which is, well, you know, actually, I'm not even going to give any sort of detail on it before I do this real quickly. But let's just say I am someone who has a PS4 and is looking for a new RPG to play. And I see this, which is this new teaser trailer for PS4, which was submitted a whopping 3 years ago. Now, we're going to go ahead, full screen it. We're going to see what this game is all about. Keep in mind, this is from the official PlayStation. You know what? I should have kept that in mind. Okay, so we're watching this, and the Blair, a phenomenon that has overtaken the world. With no means of retaliation, many continue to lose their land and their lives. So you're looking at this and you're probably thinking, this is really cool, right? This looks pretty cool. In a world on the brink of destruction, the Verse Maidens are humanity's last hope. Now, who are the Verse Maidens? Wait, what is this transition? Then it hits you. What kind of trailer is this? And that's when you're watching this, and you're thinking, okay, this is some RPG. It looks pretty cool. There's like dragons and stuff, and it's talking about how everyone is fighting for their lives, and then all of a sudden it just cuts to this, and you have whatever this is. It's a bunch of cute anime girls just dancing, and it's completely different from what the first portion of the trailer was. So if we go down here, okay, so the world is ending and humanity's only hope is a singing idol group. In this hybrid RPG idol simulation, 5 idols wield sound weapons against the dark forces of the world. Now that sounds like a very like conflicting set of I don't know, it's just very conflicting against, like, you have this dark, like, suppressing set of enemies apparently, and then you have verse maidens for pop idols. So if you were to go into the comments here, you'll see a bunch of people talking about maybe like either uh, like, oh, you know what, people need to not really care about it too much, but you got people saying like, oh yeah, I'll just wait for a real RPG, blah blah blah, straight up weeaboo status. Um, I felt like I just watched two different scenes from two different games in the same video with no visible transition. In other words, the midway, I feel like I just got hit by a train. Now that is very spot on. So, we're gonna cancel that. We can go to that in a second, the battle trailer. But I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna swap over to this, and I am going to talk about Omega Quintet. So, Omega Quintet is actually a game that I'll go ahead and read this. So this is a Reddit post that myself made, man, a whopping 24 days ago. Okay, so I just recently completed the true ending of Omega Quintet on advanced difficulty, which is the hardest difficulty setting in the game, on the PS4 version. And after putting the game down for a few months back, having gotten locked out of the story on a normal difficulty because I missed some stuff from skipping side quests and stuff, I was let down because I couldn't progress in the game. After a few months, I figured I kind of wanted to go back to the game, and it took me a few like resets of having to restart the game over and over again until I realized keeping extra saves was a good thing. But before getting into the rhythm of completing side quests at every possible break from the main story. From what I've heard, Omega Quintet is sort of the black sheep in the family of Compile Heart games. Now, Compile Heart is the company that created this game. Now, this isn't actually, like, Compile Heart didn't actually make the game. It's actually from a studio, right here, Galapagos RPG, which is like a subsidiary of Compile Heart. So if you were to think, let's just say like a studio for that works under Nintendo. I'm blanking on their name right now, but the studio that made like Donkey Kong Country, like Tropical Freeze and stuff. So, like, imagine that. So Galapagos RPG is a subsidiary of Compile Heart. And okay, it was the first. This game was actually Omega Quintet was the first game that actually came out for the PS4 from this studio, and it was an ambitious project that tried to merge an RPG along with that idol like theme that was shown in the trailer. It has expansive dungeon maps and a satisfying combo battle system, but managed to earn a lukewarm reception due to various things like how slow-paced the game is early on, among other issues. I don't have exact numbers, but I've also heard Omega Quintet did poorly when it came to sales. Now, I actually have this pulled up right here. Wait, no, that's not that. It's this right here. For this, we actually don't have the sales numbers for North America or Europe, but we can look here. For that first week when Omega Quintet hit shelves in Japan, it actually didn't even sell 10,000 units. And then the second week sold 1,500. Then after that, 600, 400, 300, 200. Stays at 200 for a couple weeks. But that is pretty poor. I'm not sure how that compares to some of the other games. I even tried looking up Neptunia, Mega Dimension Neptunia V2. They didn't even have sales numbers for that at all. But I imagine that game sold better. So here we got this. I personally enjoyed my time with the game, despite how laborious it became towards the end game, blah blah blah. And I enjoyed the dungeon exploration, enjoyed the characters, and combat was actually very interesting. Now, I was curious at the time, and I wanted to make this post because I had wanted to ask the community, which is the Hyperdimension Neptunia community. Now, Neptunia is the biggest, quote-unquote, biggest franchise that Compile Heart has ever made. Even then, it's not like it's very niche. If you were to go onto Steam, the games have actually sold like pretty surprisingly well. I would say Neptunia is, while it is a niche game, you'll look around like on YouTube, you'll see like PSN profiles and stuff with like profile pictures of Neptunia characters every once in a while. And I think it's mostly because Neptunia is sort of like this anime game that a lot of people will play, but a lot of people won't admit to playing because of obviously at first glance you look at it, you don't think it's like this really cool RPG. You think it's fan service, the game. But we have this. I made the post because I wanted to see if people who had played the game had stopped playing the game, or if they had saw it through to the end, what their overall opinions of the game were. And that it had been out for almost 3 years now, and it actually was released on PC a few months back. It was released I think in December last year, and I just wanted to see everyone's opinions on this. So I actually got quite a few replies on this post, and it really like I got a good portion of like varying answers. So like this person, this is the top comment here. He beat the entire game on the harder difficulties, but it did have major issues that could have been avoided. So the combo system is neat, but it makes generic fights take way longer than they should have. Maps are huge, but it doesn't really point you in the right direction. You'll have side quests that tell you to kill monsters, and you don't know where those monsters are located. True ending is a bitch to get. You have to do certain quests that are time restricted, in that if you go past like a certain point in the plot, you'll miss the side quest. Here, overall plot doesn't actually happen until later in the game, and then some things aren't very explained well, which is like debuffs and stuff like that. There's other problems with the game, blah blah blah. This guy, let me see. The game's not bad, but it's also not great. New Game Plus, okay. This guy actually has bought the game, but has yet to play it. There's a few more that were actually pretty interesting. Yeah, this is talking about the difficulty. This game is very difficult. It's too hard to beat. It has great mechanics, but a lame story. This game, he picked up the game, and he couldn't really pinpoint why he stopped playing it, but it's just very like off-putting. And then this guy talks about some stuff about like how um, all the like disappointments with the game. Now, I'm going to end that there, and I'm going to talk about why I played the game. It's been quite a while, and I still thoroughly enjoy this game. So I'm going to go click on the battle trailer, which is actually the second trailer that the PlayStation YouTube channel put out. And this game, I mean, this trailer actually does a little bit better of a job of kind of showcasing what this game is all about. Now, like I said, this game is an RPG, and it combines some other various things like being able to like create your own like concert stuff, which is like idol based. But this is showcasing the battle mechanics. Now, I don't know. I think the editing's not really that great on this, but it doesn't really matter. So you get to show that you have all of these 5 verse maidens here on the battlefield, and you have various like attack commands that you can use against the enemies. Now, defenses will weaken is actually something that you'll see on the bottom. They have like a purple gauge, and that's actually like the fan service gauge. So if that gauge runs out, your outfits will break and you take increased damage. This is where some of the music-based stuff in the combat comes in. So you have that voltage gauge on the bottom right that builds as you do more damage, and with it you can activate ranges of music or like songs that are sung by like the characters, and it gives you like status buffs and certain things like that. And then you also have a feature called harmonics, which is, or I think the real bread and butter of the game comes in, which is where if you line up all of your characters and you activate harmonics, you get to use this very like really satisfying combat system where you have combos and you can like combo all of your attacks in synchronization against enemies, all without being interrupted and all while just being able to do damage. Now, combat of this game, I think, is very interesting because I have tons of gameplay from my time with the game, and with that, I actually can kind of show this, which I should be able to have up on screen, that this game, compared to a lot of other RPGs that you might have, that you'd be able to look at, this game has a very like stark contrast with like tons of people will complain about how difficult the game is on the harder settings, and some of that is due to a mechanic that's called order break, which is where the enemies will be able to cut in midway during your attacks, be able to hit you hard, and be able to oftentimes be able to just one-shot you. And I actually don't really have a problem with that. If you look at the gameplay that I'll hopefully be showing up on screen right now, is that this game is very much centered around a like, even for regular enemies, not even just bosses, is very much centered around you being able to activate harmonics, and with that you kind of like nuke the enemy to where you can do these like really high string combos to pretty much wipe out enemies within that one turn that you attack. But at the same time, enemies have that same advantage over you, that they can pretty much wipe you out in an instant. And the game, like whenever I even for like post-game content, I actually found that the combat becomes even more like you can tell that it was built with a lot of like intentions. Like everything for this game is pretty much like they intended it this way. So for like post-game content, you can see that there's a lot of things that you can kind of run through with using the live concert mode and being able to activate harmonics and stuff. And you get to have these battles with like regular enemies, maybe while you're trying to get some sort of like rare item that you need in order to progress for post-game content. And you'll have enemies, and then they'll maybe one-shot you, and then you revive your party members, and you basically work towards, during the battle, breaking down the guard meter that each like enemy has, so that way you do increased damage to them, and then all the while trying to line up your party members, so that way you can activate that harmonics, use that string of attacks, and be able to finish the battle with a very satisfying like combo. And I think, you know, moving into that, I'm gonna talk about how a lot of like RPGs, maybe you'll have a game that's like turn-based, where you use your attack and then enemy attacks you, and then you use your attack, and I don't know. Or like let's say you have multiple party members, but they all have separate attacks that you can't combine them together. And I think with how flashy Omega Quintet is, because like I said, everything in this game is very deliberate, from the story to the combat. Everything, I think, comparing it to Neptunia, where people in the Neptunia community will argue and say, you know, some of the stuff isn't really fully thought through. A new game that's actually coming out in a month from now that's called Neptunia V2R. When that game came out in Japan, I saw a lot of people online talking about how, oh, the game's like really unbalanced. You can see that they have this like new counter system that they obviously didn't plan through, and they just kind of like added it for the fun of it. They didn't test it. Some of the like story and stuff, you'll see there's like plot holes and all this other stuff. But Galapagos RPG, actually, this is their second game that they made. The first game they made was a title by the name of Fairy Fencer F. Everyone seems to love this game. Fairy Fencer F is actually a very interesting game. If I had to describe it, I would say it's kind of like Xenoblade Chronicles 2, where it has this whole like thematic theme of like heroes, and then they have these like partners that provide them power. So like in Xenoblade it's called the Blades, and then in Fairy Fencer they're called Furies. And a lot of that game is pretty much like a really good balance between like really seriousness with like the story, but then also having like some light humor to like toss into the game to make it not all too like overly serious. I would say the characters in that game are very likable, but then the one thing that I would argue with Fairy Fencer is that the combat is a little bit underwhelming. Now, getting back to Omega Quintet, you can tell that they actually took this game in. I'll get into the story in a bit, but keeping on to the combat, for combat, you can tell that they took it up a notch. They made sure that everything was very deliberate, and with how flashy like every combo is, it becomes this sort of like satisfaction to where you can play maybe a game like, let's say, you know, for Kingdom Hearts, let's actually compare it to that, because I'd say this is actually pretty relevant. So if for anyone that's ever actually played Kingdom Hearts, you might have played a game by the name of Kingdom Hearts 2. Now that game is often titled the best like game out of all the Kingdom Hearts games in terms of combat. That game is I guess you could call it a hack and slash. That's like mixed with an RPG, and that game is very deliberate with all of its bosses. If you were to watch speedruns of the game, you'll get to see just how thoroughly like well programmed the game is. How every enemy will like stagger when you attack them. Every boss has like certain openings for you to exploit, and like just in general the game is really well put together. But on top of that though, people will argue that there is one particular thing in the game, which is Reflect, which is a little overpowered, but in the same way it's not too crazy, and it's still a very balanced game overall. Then if you were to look at later games in the Kingdom Hearts series, like let's say Birth by Sleep, which was a PSP game, it's now on PS3 and PS4. But that game is very much argued to be a really just spammy type game. The game is all about kind of you don't really have that much cooldowns on your attacks that you use, and you can use a bunch of like really overpowered attacks that you'd want, and all those attacks are really flashy, and all those attacks are like really fun and satisfying to use, but as far as like actual gameplay, it's not exciting. Going back to Omega Quintet, I would say that this is a really nice combination of the two. This Omega Quintet's combat, once you've actually played through it for a good amount, is very like it's very strategic. You can't just kind of like spam moves and just like really win. You have to be very strategic around your fights, and you have to actually be fearful of your enemies. Thinking like maybe Dark Souls or something, where you're going into this area and you know that every enemy in that area is going to have it out for you, and that you could lose everything at any moment. That's the kind of like feeling I get from this game for the enemies compared to well, let's take it back to Neptunia, which is the most relatable game that you can compare this game to, and that you can kind of just like destroy enemies and you don't really care about them at all. And that's the same thing going with like so many different RPGs. I can name so many where you can just kind of play the game. You'll know that the bosses are going to be the things that give you trouble. All the regular enemies, you don't think of them as um, like something to be afraid of. You think of them as an inconvenience to you as the player. You think these are time sinks rather than these are enemies that me as the character needs to be wary of. And Omega Quintet, getting back onto where with the Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep comparison, while the game is very strategic, it's also very much like Birth by Sleep in that I've seen comparisons to Birth by Sleep being somewhat like a mobile game. There's so many like flashy like attacks and so many like satisfactory like hit registrations on enemies that it gives you um that like emotion that like that hit to your like to your brain saying that this is like a good feeling and I am like just kind of having with all like all the bright colors and everything, it makes it so then it's like it just kind of does something to you that makes you feel really like satisfied. And I do think that with Omega Quintet's case, with it being able to have such a balance between a very strategic RPG experience and also being able to have that somewhat like addictive kind of gameplay to where as you play and as you're actually pulling out these combos, you have that sense of satisfaction. I think it really does work in Omega Quintet's favor as far as how its combat is structured. Alright, so now I'm going to be moving on to the story and the characters and the setting as well. And this is where I'm going to start having to dip down into the spoiler territory. So if you are at any chance interested in playing the game for yourself and not being spoiled, I would suggest either maybe skipping ahead in the video or maybe just taking the moment to close out the video and play the game for yourself. So now that I've got that warning out of the way, I'm going to get into the characters and story. Now, one of the major things that I also see a lot of people talk about is that the very like the personalities of all 5 of the verse maidens are very unrealistic in that that you have what Kyoka, which is like the stereotypical like tsundere character. You have Atoha, which is the um, uh, childhood friend character. You've got like Nene, which is this like really like meek and shy girl. You have Kanadeko, which is the like super like energetic, bouncing off the walls type of girl. And then you have Arya, who is a little bit of a mystery. She has like a very slow way of talking. She's very sleepy all the time, and other than that, there's not a whole lot known about Arya. Now, gonna get into some of the lore as far as the Verse Maidens. Now, I could try and probably record some gameplay of this, but as you progress through the game, you'll actually find these like diary or like journal entries scattered throughout the world in the game. And I would almost say it's kind of like I think it's called the data logs in Final Fantasy 13. Now, it is actually nowhere near as like extensive and as much of like a time sink to read through these as Final Fantasy 13. And reading through the lore in Omega Quintet actually isn't as um, much of like an importance as you're playing through the game as it would maybe if you're playing Final Fantasy 13, where a lot of people complain about that game is that the story was confusing and whatnot. But if you were to read these like journal entries, which takes maybe like 15-20 minutes to read through all of them, you'll get to see a lot of the like backstory that isn't fully explained throughout the game about like the verse maidens and like the situation and setting of the game. So as you would see as you start up the game is that the Blair are these enemies that have cropped up throughout the world, and they basically go around killing people. Now, the Blair ends up consuming most of the planet, and they create this barrier around the one particular city that the game takes place in, where you like the entire group of people are stuck in the city. You have no idea whether there's like life on the outside of the barrier, and this barrier has been around for years. If you read the journal entries, you'll get to see about like how the verse maidens were created and how like verse maidens as like you think where they're like this super kawaii anime like idol group, and you actually read into how the military is like responsible for creating the verse maidens. So they end up finding out that only like younger like females have the ability to destroy the Blair through the use of their voices. And at first they grab whoever these like girls are and they experiment on them, and they like try and find out why they can like kill the Blair. And they end up, whenever they find for some reason like young girls are able to kill the Blair, and whenever they like the military and the government finds out that there is a girl that has the potential to kill Blair, they go to that family and they basically rip that like child away from their family and then train them for years to use as like military weapons against the Blair, forcefully against their will, mind you. And as they progress, they decide to turn these girls that they've been using as military weapons into like a morale booster for the citizens by turning them into what is known as the Verse Maidens, where they put them in like the idol kind of trope or whatever, and they have them not only being used as like tools of war to protect the people and defeat the Blair, but also to like be these like faces of hope to to like the average citizen. And that's actually pretty like deep, considering that when you start up the game you think maybe it's a very cutesy game, but as you play through the game you'll actually find that this game goes from being very colorful and like fun and humorous, and as you progress further and further into the game gets darker and darker. So dark, I mean, it's almost like how you would consider maybe one of the most popular games in recent memory would be Doki Doki Literature Club, and how that game tries to portray itself as like this average anime dating sim, and then as you progress through that, then obviously it turns into like a horror like game. So it's psychological horror, but Omega Quintet is almost in that same kind of way, in that it's this very like colorful, cutesy, like idol simulation game, and then as you progress further and further, you get to find out more and more about the Blair how Arya is linked to the Blair and how bleak the world you're living in really is. How all of the verse maidens kind of start off having fun and all that other stuff, but then as they progress further and further, they start to lack the motivation to continue moving on. The citizens start to lose faith in them, and they start to lose faith in themselves. Now, going into what a okay, so the game, one fact that people don't like as far as the gameplay goes is that there's two endings to the game. There is the normal ending and the quote unquote true ending. Now, the normal ending is what a lot of people who actually played the game got, and that was because they didn't go through all of the special requirements for the true ending, which I'll get into in a second. Now, the normal ending, I actually haven't gotten this ending. I've watched it though, and I can tell where people got frustrated. So you go through this game for like 30, 40 hours, you get to the end, and then you see, okay, so spoilers, that you fight Arya, who actually ends up being a verse maiden who was like not possessed, but she was like taking like her emotions were taken away from her by a very powerful Blair, and Arya was then transformed into a Blair herself. Then she goes around and she creates more Blair within the city that terrorizes the citizens. Now, despite this though, Arya actually, since she's been working with you as like a verse maiden throughout the whole game, she's been deceiving you. She's actually come to like the company of others. But the thing with Arya is that she enjoys the company of the others, but in the normal ending, after you fought Arya, the building that you fight her in starts to collapse, and you try and get her to come with you, but she refuses to come with you. So the entire group of Verse Maidens is forced to leave her there, and then you get this cutscene where Arya uh, gets hit by a boulder or it's like just falling debris or whatever, and you're forced to leave her there. After that, you see like a cutscene away from the rest of the Verse Maidens where Arya is talking to the Blair that stole her emotions from her, and uh, the Blair takes back the power that he gave to Arya and turns Arya back into like a regular human. Then, like immediately afterward, though, Arya dies, and then you cut back to a cutscene where all of the Verse Maidens have been not like performing or having the broadcasts of them taking out Blair for a couple months, and it's their first broadcast since defeating Arya. And the I haven't gone into this yet, but there is a specific NPC that was earlier in the game, which is kind of where the game starts to get dark in the first place, and that is where one of the NPCs that works alongside the Verse Maidens is basically the person that will clear the area of civilians whenever there's an attack, and is able to like get rid of the crowd in order to like make sure that everyone's safe. He ends up being possessed by the Blair about towards like not towards the very end of the game, but I think it's chapter 7 is when that happens. Chapter 7, yeah. And so that person is gone, and you're for the first broadcast in several months, and there's tons of civilians surrounding you as you're about to try and clear out the Blair, and you're trying to tell them to like get out of the way or whatever, and then you have the fan club, the Verse Maiden fan club that's there, and you have the leader of the fan club is trying to like get everyone to be pumped up and excited, and then the regular like civilians say, hey, you know what, I thought the Verse Maidens were with that one person that was creating the Blair, why should we like them? and they do all this like trash talking of the verse maidens. And basically, I mean, I don't have the exact quote. I'll probably have to grab the video from somewhere else, and I'll link it in the description as well. But I think it's a very like really impactful quote that I'm gonna paraphrase here, which is that they say, "Oh yeah, well, I guess the world is just full of shitty people," and that's basically where the game cuts out. Then you have the credits roll. You don't have any vocal for the song that plays for the credits, and that's basically the end of the normal ending. So a lot of people played that when they got the game and were really dissatisfied with it. That there was no happy ending at the end of the game, and then they probably took to online, checked out the requirements for the true ending, and saw that you had to do probably somewhere close to maybe like 20 to 30 side quests that were completely mandatory for true ending. And a lot of those side quests are kind of either linked to other side quests throughout the game, or you might as well just do all of the side quests anyway, because there's like a trophy attached to it, and it helps you get your like support rate up and all that stuff. So after I actually had went back and watched the normal ending, I kind of was hit with a realization as far as true ending and why. You know, the Galapagos RPG was the company that made this game and Fairy Fencer F, but why they might have taken the route where in Fairy Fencer doing side quests doesn't it's not required at all, and it has no link to the overall story. But with Omega Quintet, I feel like I might have come to the right realization as to why they made the design choice to link side quests and story. And that goes back to how citizens portray or how they view you and all the verse maidens throughout the game based off of the side quests that you have done. So, in most games, like even in this game, so you take up side quests, and a lot of the time you'll maybe have it, and it's just this little screen that says, okay, do this fetch quest for me, and that's it. Now, there's very few games I think that really have that like hit home sort of side quest thing mechanic where you go to an NPC and you get this like really emotional like attachment to the NPCs, and you feel their like struggle and want to help them. I feel like in my sort of memory, the only games that really like hit that mark would be probably Majora's Mask, Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, and then I know people will put Witcher 3 up there on that pedestal as well for having these like fully voice acted cutscenes for your NPC like side quests, and it makes it like really interacts with makes the player like really be engaged in the world. But obviously, if you have played Omega Quintet, you will have seen that the side quest in that game is you go to the town menu, and you just have like a list of either like maps you can go to or like sub events for characters, and then you have NPCs that will have quests listed. You click on it, they'll give you the like the sentence, the one or two sentences, say, oh, can you do this, fight this monster, grab this item for me, and then you accept it or not. And I want to say, you know, it kind of goes into, well, if you are thinking about who you're playing as in this game, you're playing as the popular verse maidens. You are a set of people that are on maybe like a higher established like plane rather than the regular average Joe, the average citizen. And your job is to protect and serve the citizens. Now, you're not going to memorize every single citizen's face that you see that you help. And I think the way that you kind of grab your side quests is you just take it because you know you have to, and then you look at your list and you see, okay, well, I have to do this, this, and this. And the fact that you don't actually have this like really in-depth like bond with the citizens of your side quest kind of goes into that whole like mindset of you being on like a step up from the average Joe, and that you are just kind of living through your daily life doing what's your job. Now, if you were playing through the game normally, and let's say you're skipping side quests and you're not really completing a lot of things, you're rushing through the story, the game developers, I feel, wanted to maybe punish that. The fact that you have cutscenes that you will see regardless of what storyline you or what ending you're on track for getting, being that you'll see the moment when Arya reveals herself to be a Blair, and you see that the citizens have very like wavering opinions of you, and think that maybe the Verse Maidens aren't a very good group to support. It really helps to cement the fact that maybe if you were skipping side quests and all that, that you are going to see the different side and like the different sort of, well, it's not different, but the main point they wanted to run home with to the players, and they wanted to convey to players who played the game, was that, you know, regardless of whether like what you're doing in life, you're always going to have these down points in life. And back to that quote for the normal ending, that the world can be very shitty sometimes. So I think for the normal ending, they wanted to maybe do that, where you have this very, very like kind of underwhelming like sense of just like dread when you beat the game and you see that your actions weren't good enough, in that the citizens don't approve of you. And on the flip side of that, if you do the true ending, you've done close to every side quest in the game. You actually aren't required to do every side quest. There's actually a Google Docs page that someone actually had created that lists off all of the side quests that are mandatory, but even then, there's still a lot, and some of it towards the very end of the game is definitely very patience testing. You have to fight maybe like 3 to 4 like super bosses towards the end of the game before you can even get to the true ending. But going back away from that though, is that the true ending, you've done all these side quests, you have gone above and beyond for the like all of the average citizens, and they want to reward you, the game developers, by showing you that maybe like if you put in the work and you're like showing that like compassion for the people and protecting them or whatever, that you would have this good ending that would give you like the positive feeling of completion. Now, I mean, I didn't actually play through the normal ending, so I only beaten the game with the true ending. I had, if you, in the Reddit post I described that I had initially picked up the game before, I would have been en route for the normal ending, but I had just kind of gotten stuck and put down the game. But at least in my opinion, after completing the game, I think, you know, with this might have not been the actual reasoning for the developers to create such a side quest like entwined story, but you know, I feel like I had that sort of a realization after watching the normal ending, that it could have been very possible that they wanted to portray the message that there's a lot of good people in the world and there's a lot of bad people in the world. And I feel like Omega Quintet actually, like, if you have even just done the true ending, or if you had done normal ending and then true ending, that you as the player would get that like impactful message that they had wanted to send. So, I feel like this might not even be too far of a reach either, because there have actually been games like this, and there's even one in my recent memory that came out last year that gave its players a very, very, like, just different outlook on how games could be this sort of like emotional media. And that game was Nier Automata. Now, for those of you that have played that game, you would have known, well, that game is about Yorha, which is this like resistance group of robots who are fighting for like the world against this other group of robots. And as you progress through the game, I don't want to go into spoilers of that because it's also not strictly Omega Quintet. But if you were to know that you've played that game, as you get further and further, you start to have these realizations and you have these plot twists, and it really like had a very emotional impact on players who played that game, in that they saw the bleakness, in that there was very little hope, and the whole thing about like how bad humanity can be and whatnot. And at the end of the game, assuming that you've done all the requirements, you'd be tasked with fighting an optional boss, or not an optional boss, but the final boss. And without spoiling that final boss gave players a choice. Whether it wasn't even a choice that was linked specifically to the game itself, but to other players playing the game. And it presented you the choice to either maybe be a good person or be selfish. And I think just being able to have these games that show this like very emotional side of humanity, I feel like Omega Quintet does that same sort of level of like message portraying. Even though Nier Automata and Omega Quintet are very different games, and Nier Automata just has like slight little bits of humor, while Omega Quintet has quite a bit of humor actually. And it's like I said, early game it's very cutesy, and then it starts to like mold into this like really like depressing and like hideous kind of like difficult game. But yeah, I think with the topic of the true ending, I've seen there's even I could maybe link one of them. There's a total of two Omega Quintet rants that I actually did find on YouTube already from people portraying their problems with the game. One of them, I'm not entirely sure. It was definitely rage-filled. The other one was very concise and had a lot of points in it, and was that the person had played the normal ending, really hated it, and then felt kinda like, oh, this sucks, I gotta play through the game again to get true ending. But he didn't have a problem with it too much. But it was still very much showing that, the game has issues, and I am not denying it at all. This game is not the perfect game by any means, but like I've said, with how I'd want to think about this game, is that this game is very different. It took a really big risk to be able to try and pull off such a like conflicting set of like RPG plus idle simulation. And for as underrated as the game is, I think it actually did a pretty good job. Now, with the multiple endings, I've seen some people talk about that they kind of didn't like that there's multiple endings. They wish it was maybe just one ending, and you wouldn't have to do that thing where you'd play through normal mode and then you find out, oh, I gotta spend another like 10 hours in New Game Plus to try and get the true ending. And I feel like that's actually somewhat strange, just in the case that I've looked into with what I had mentioned earlier, the game Mega Dimension Neptunia V2R, which comes out in about a month. And that game is a remake of Mega Dimension Neptunia V2, and in that game, that game had 3 different endings, and now in the remake only just has one. And I've seen some people say that they're disappointed that they removed the various endings in that game. Now, I think it's all up to personal preference, but you know, I will kind of agree that for Omega Quintet, I feel like removing the endings, the normal ending, would have shifted the sort of like message that you could see in the game. Like I said earlier, that if you were to play through the normal ending, you have this realization that what I did as a player wasn't good enough, and that you have to try again. And I don't know. I feel like it's very vital to the game to have the multiple endings. In Mega Dimension Neptunia, there was 3 different endings. One of well, you have the true ending, which is the best ending. You had a normal ending, which was where you finish the game, but one of the most important characters of the game ends up dying, similar to Arya. And then you had in that game a bad ending, which was kind of like a joke ending, where you didn't even get to fight the final boss, and you ended up just kind of like dying. Well, not dying, but like just continuing to live in like a really messed up world. But you know, I think with the endings, I believe Omega Quintet had its problems, obviously, in battle concepts with the endings as well. But overall, Omega Quintet still a really solid game, in my opinion. Alright, so before I wrap things up here with this video, I wanted to bring into one final topic, which is the fact that this game had been out for almost 3 years now, and only just recently got a release on PC by Ghostlight. Now, keep in mind this is Ghostlight, which is a well, I guess third-party developer, or not even developer, but like I guess they mostly do port work on games, and they I guess they were responsible for porting Fairy Fencer F as well. But Idea Factory, which is the publisher of Compile Heart games over here in the West, didn't actually port this themselves, which they do actually port them themselves for stuff like Neptunia games. Now, I wanted to bring into the topic of why Ghostlight would port this, other than the fact that maybe they just thought that they could for money. Now, we'll read through this, I guess, real quick. I have 2 different pages here. One of them is just the announcement that they're going to be releasing Omega Quintet on the PC. Omega Quintet was developed by Compile Heart under the brand Galapagos RPG for PS4. It was originally released in Europe last year, and then it goes into the reviews and stuff, and then it gives details on what the game's about, all this other stuff, and we're here to try and create the best PC release possible. Alright, now we're going to move on to this, which you can look. This is the release blog post about the game. They give some footage. They have what exactly is Omega Quintet. They describe some of the battle mechanics and whatnot. And then here is where I wanted to kind of talk about why maybe Ghostlight wanted to port this game to PC, where this game would arguably have a better chance at sales and like a wider range of audience. Now, here at Ghostlight, we've really enjoyed working on what we consider to be a brilliant JRPG and some of Idea Factory International's finest work to date. But in case you think we're a little biased, check out these reviews. We give some reviews, 4 out of 5, 7 out of 10. Omega Quintet is an amazing title and a great start to the new generation of consoles. talk about thanking the beta testers and all that stuff. So, I am under the impression that maybe Ghostlight and, Idea Factory International with Omega Quintet, if you were to compare it to any of the other like main PS4 games and even stuff like Mary Skelter, which is on the Vita, and like some of the like really like huge titles that Compile Heart has made, you'll notice Omega Quintet has a lot more voice acting, and it also has a lot more depth to it. Like if you're walking around in one of the maps, you'll notice that at certain key points, when you like maybe reach a waterfall or you're like in an open plain or something, there's some sort of landmark. The character that you are controlling on the map will have like very exact and like precise like dialogue for that moment. So you'll be like, oh, look at that waterfall. I wonder if we could jump in and stuff like that. And I think there is so much detail that was put into Omega Quintet, considering that it was the first game that was coming out on PS4. I think Ghostlight probably, they could have looked at Omega Quintet. I mean, they would have ported Fairy Fencer F first, but they looked maybe at Omega Quintet, saw that Idea Factory wasn't going to put the resources in to bringing the Omega Quintet to a bigger audience on Steam, and they decided that they wanted to because they deep down thought that Omega Quintet was a really good JRPG that had its moments of brilliance, like despite the fact that it had very specific problems with it that turned off players. And they decided to port the game to Steam in order to provide the game with that second chance of being able to maybe be out on Steam and have a second chance at audiences and maybe be able to get the recognition that they thought that Omega Quintet kind of deserved. So, I think ending that here, I've gone through with the gameplay and the story and kind of my thoughts on the game. And while I definitely know that Omega Quintet has its problems and that, it's not a game for everyone. If you were to like play through the game and you didn't really like games that were gonna force you to do tons of side quests, or maybe you don't really you're turned off by the very cutesy design of the game, it's not a game that's for everyone. But like with how I had said at the beginning of the video, or I would compare it to maybe something along the lines of Earthbound, in that this game is not really, it came out and not a whole lot of people were like praising this. I think it has this very like niche core demographic that it does so many things so differently, with like the battle mechanics, having this like combo system, but then you also have very weird features. Like you have, because it's an idol simulation, you can play around with like creating little like mock-up concerts in like a subsection in like the main hub world, or yeah, I guess I could call it the hub world or whatever. But you can like go and you can do all these like choreographed like dance poses and stuff, which actually, if you were to watch some of the Japanese trailers for the game, they actually Compile Heart even brought in a team of, I guess, like dancers or whatever, and they hooked them up to the green screen, and they did the process of being able to where they have a human and they have them hooked up to the wires and everything, and then you're able to capture the movements and then be able to transfer that over into the video game character models. Now, Compile Heart also wanted to try and advertise the game as like an idle game, and they had wanted to utilize the brand new PS4 share button in order to have people create their own like custom videos using the dances and stuff, and then upload it online to like Facebook and Twitter and stuff. And a lot of that probably took away some sort of resources from the main game. So I think they put a lot of effort into this game, and there was so many different like clashing points of the game between the combat, and then you have maybe like the structure of the game. Maybe it's a little bit too slow paced, and then you have all of this extra idle stuff in the background, but it still manages to have its its moments of brilliance that I feel have gone really underrated, with not only just like the Neptunia community, which is the main like compile heart community, but also just like in RPGs in general. It's been quite a few years, and now that it's out on Steam, you can see that even now that it's had its second chance, it hasn't really done too well. Like I had it pulled up earlier in the video on accident at one point, when it showed that there was, for the total of concurrent players that had played Omega Quintet, it was a whopping 4 or 5 players. So I don't know, this game, I'm not sure if you can call it a bomb, but I feel Omega Quintet does something very different. It's very risky, but overall I enjoyed the game, and I wanted to make this video to see if, maybe not even just to convince people to try out the game, but to maybe, I mean, well, yeah, if I made this video and was able to maybe change your mind to at least give this game a shot the next time it goes on sale, I'll consider that a success. But I also wanted to just bring some awareness to this game, because I feel like it has been very underrated, very overlooked, and this game deserves at least a little bit more attention. So, wrapping things up, I think I'm going to end this here. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I actually did not have really any sort of script. I just had some general like lines written out that I was able to kind of use to try and stay on track. So this is my first time making a video like this. If you guys think that there's anything that I could have improved on, let me know in the comments, and hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you, and I will see you guys next time.
Tonight, at long last, a legendary event has returned. A concert brought to you by none other than our amazing quintet. Let's give it up for the First Maidens! Go